Many people have been taught that they'll go low if they don't eat breakfast, or that they'll go low if they don't eat before exercise. But that's only if you have insulin on board, right? That's back in the day when we had far limited options in terms of insulin and we didn't have CGMs. You didn't have a choice. You had to eat before exercise because you had regular insulin that was in your system for like 6 hours, right? And so some of the education hasn't caught up with that. If you go low just by skipping breakfast, you have too much background insulin in your system. Your doses are too high.
Welcome to the Type 1 and Midlife podcast. My name is Melissa Slemp, a certified nutritional health coach and the founder and CEO of Abundant Health with Melissa, where I help women with type 1 diabetes to feel more empowered and live their best life despite their diagnosis. Each week, I will bring conversations and strategies from guest experts and my experience living with type 1 for over 40 years now. So if you're a woman ready to redefine how diabetes can look and feel for you, then the Type 1 and Midlife podcast is the show for you. Today we talk with Ginger Vieira. She is amazing. She is big in the diabetes community. She is an author and speaker, and she's wrote many articles for publications. And she gets to come in and talk about her own diagnosis when she was 13 and how mindset and an inspired mantra from her father continues to drive her with hope as she lives with type 1 diabetes. So come on in and listen to what Ginger has to share with us today. Just a reminder that nothing you hear on this Type 1 and Midlife podcast should be a substitute for professional medical advice. Please always consult your medical professional before changing your diet, insulin dosages, or healthcare plan. Well, hello. Welcome to Type 1 and Midlife podcast. And we're happy to be here with Ginger today. Ginger, I am so excited you are here. We talked just a little bit before I hit record today to start our talk. And it's just really nice to put a face with a story and all the things that I've just been inspired just watching you, share your expertise and your stories in books and online and all the above. So could you share I did share a little bit about you in the introduction, your, all of the things that you've done, but if you could just maybe introduce yourself. I know you're a busy mom, an author, a writer, along with managing type 1 diabetes. Just share a little bit about you.
Sure.
And then we want to kind of roll into your diagnosis story, because I always like to hear that too.
Of course. And I have to tell you, the feeling is mutual. I love the positive encouragement that you put out through all of the work you do, Melissa. So thank you for having me. Meeting of the minds here. So my name is Ginger Vieira. I have lived with type 1 for about 25 years. I also have celiac disease. I eventually developed fibromyalgia after very intense Russian powerlifting training programs. And I have a little bit of a sluggish thyroid. And I also was recently diagnosed with POTS, which basically just means I get really dizzy when I stand up. It happens like many times a day. It's a weird little thing, but it has not slowed me down. So that's my chronic illness background. But I went to college for professional writing. And while I was in that journey, I had really kind of stopped taking good care of myself my first couple of years of college. And I had this moment where my A1C was the highest it had ever been. And I was like, whoa. And it inspired me to spend the summer between my junior and senior year exercising and eating better. And by the end of that, I had gotten really sucked into the fitness world. And I ended up graduating college also with a personal training certification in Ashtanga yoga. And combined over the years, I've combined my love for fitness and health with my love of writing, and have produced a handful of books and hundreds of articles on how to thrive with type 1 and type 2 diabetes.
Yeah. That's amazing, because, I think the best teachers, and you're just a perfect example of it, as those of us that live it.
Right.
And I think it does help those that we both coach and help and serve, I think that's the number one thing I get as far as feedback is that I came to you because you get it. And there's such a connection there, and that's not putting down doctors and other healthcare because they do their role, but it's just it's such a unique thing. And, diabetes is very unique. I was thinking about this the other day about, this is a chronic disease. We can't take a day off. It's with us 24/7. And it's such a unique thing to help somebody with.
If you don't live with it, I always say, it's not that the CDEs or the doctors who don't have diabetes don't have a lot of knowledge, but there's just so many things that they'll never know because they haven't had to sleep with it and live with it and go to work with it. And there's just too many little details, that they can never experience firsthand. And also just in that then fitness world, I've had to work very hard to maintain my weight, for example, and I've been much heavier than I am now. And even when I was exercising the most in my powerlifting training years, I was 30 pounds heavier than I am now. And so having gone through the experience of, I wasn't born with a six pack. I don't have a six pack now, but I have to work really hard for my fitness. And that's another level of, it's hard to get nutrition and fitness and weight loss advice from someone who's just always had a six pack, right?
That is so true.
That other level of having lived it.
Yeah. And not to mention how unique we all are too. Just like you say, your path with, with all the things that you're dealing with health is going to steer your journey, just like people that we work with. Right. So, and that's the beauty of it too, So with your childhood, because, but we were both diagnosed. I was 14, almost 15. You were about 13, right?
Yeah.
Wow. What a time that was, right? We had enough going on. Talk about hormones, right?
Right.
And so how was that for you? And how was your support through, your childhood with your family?
Sure. My diagnosis story is a little funny. I actually I diagnosed myself because my 7th grade class was working on the 7th grade health fair projects. And one of my classmates did his project on diabetes. I looked at his poster board when we were all working in class that day, and I had all the symptoms, and they'd been increasing ever since I'd had the flu 3 weeks before that. My whole family had the flu. Mine just felt like it didn't go away. But because I was a teenager, they're like, oh, you just need glasses. That's why your vision's blurry. A lot of us have glasses. I'm the youngest of 6 kids. So there's a lot too easily to dismiss. Oh, of course you don't want to go to school because your legs feel weird. Like, you're 13, right? I'd lost weight very quickly. But so I went to my mom and I said, I think I have diabetes. And she said, no, only old people get that. And like a week later, I stayed home from school because I felt so lousy. And I burst into tears when she asked me how I was doing. So I have a lot of brothers, so I wasn't allowed to cry very much. Right. She took that as a red flag and took me to the doctor. And I was diagnosed with celiac about a year later.
Interesting. Yeah. Your body was, I think my diagnosis, I think, was similar. Again, we'll really never know what triggered it. There's so many theories out there about viral, but I too had a very interesting childhood around that time. And I think it might've just been, whether it's virus, stress, whatever, but somehow the body, the pancreas was.
Yeah, now we have so much research on that I'm very passionate about because it points to screening your kids. I've screened both my children 3 times each because what they know now is that even though our symptoms and the full onset happened when we were 13, 14, we started that autoimmune attack probably before the age of 5. And if we had been tested for autoantibodies back then, it would have shown at least 1 or 2 back then. And it can take years. And then there's, a lot of still uncertainty, but environmental factors or genetic factors can help trigger the full onset. But the flu did not cause type 1 diabetes. COVID does not cause type 1 diabetes. It's already lurking there. And then something triggers the full autoimmune attack where you're
totally agree.
Love clarifying that for people because I know it gets so confused.
It is. I know. And, that's something that I try to focus too. This is my goal here is, we can't get too bogged down with the details. We all have struggles, whether it's health, relationship, that is something we're promised in this life. And
Right.
it's
Well
really,
said.
and it's really how we adjust to it. And it took me years to accept my disease. But once, it's amazing what happens. That mindset shift really does empower you. And then you realize how amazing and strong you are.
Yeah.
And it just makes a difference. And it's amazing how your body shifts. And I'm sure you found that same road, right? Just
Well, I love that
realizing
you said, yeah, I love that you said we're not promised health, because feel very strongly about the trap of self-pity. And when I was in the 7th grade, I literally cried for the first couple of days in my hospital stay. And by day 3, I remember realizing, like, oh, there are so many of my friends, even at 13 years old, who had already been through some tremendous challenges, losing a parent to a brain tumor, having a brain tumor themselves, sexual abuse, depression. It was like hemophilia. And I just realized, oh, nobody around me has it easy. This is my challenge, and we all have challenges. And honestly, that mindset is what really, I think, can make or break how any chronic illness affects your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Amen to that. Definitely. So on a different, I'm going to switch here a little bit, because how do you currently manage your diabetes right now?
Oh, sure. So
And I think we have a lot in common with this as well, but
okay.
Here you're.
Okay. I prefer MDI, multiple daily injections. I used a pump for many years, but I hate all the technical failures of it. It just drives me nuts. So I take Lantus once a day. I use little bits of Novolog, and then I use mostly inhaled insulin, Afrezza, for my meals and corrections whenever possible. There's still times where I need some Novolog because of the limitations of Afrezza dosing.
Yeah.
And I also now take metformin, and I've been on Ozempic for about 6 months, which has been really awesome.
Yeah, that is really good. And I've read your story. I've followed that. I love your path with that, and the fact that you figured it out for yourself. And you know what? And just as a side note, I'd love to bring you back at a different time. Maybe we can dig into those topics.
Sure.
But,
That's a whole nother ball wax.
Oh, it really is. There's so many things to there's so many layers, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm MDI as well. 41 years. Can you imagine? Still taking shots, but it works.
Yeah.
And
it's whatever you're willing to do, right?
Absolutely. It's all about the freedom, and as long as you're able to find what works.
Yes.
And obviously the A1C. That's our.
And I do wear a CGM. So
yeah.
that is definitely.
Yeah. Same here. Okay. So your book. So you have a total of 6 books that you've written, and 2 were for children. And one of them, the name is Ain't Gonna Hide My T1D. And that one really spoke to me. So was that inspired from a personal experience from you?
I have never hidden my T1D, not for a second. But I've spent a lot of time with kids who have type 1. I've had people reach out to me privately about feeling embarrassed by their tech. And I've sat at a table with like 5 kindergartners who all had type 1, and watching them, on a kindergartner, an insulin pump looks humongous, and I can't imagine like what that's like for them to physically carry that around all day.
Yeah.
And so it's really daunting to be the different kid at school who has all this tech showing. So that book is really about how to stand up for yourself, how to view that you are different on the outside there, and how to talk to kids that say mean things.
Yeah. And, and to wear it with pride. And that takes time. I know for myself, it took me time. I work with clients that's still a struggle. So this book could easily be translated for adults as well.
The same message I do. I mean, there are adults who are embarrassed, right, by their diabetes. And what I like to explain is personal mindset is, if you carry your diabetes as something you're proud of because of the challenges that you face every day, other people will see it as something to be proud of. If you carry it as something you're embarrassed by, other people see it as something that's embarrassing.
That is so true.
Really all about the way you present it.
That is perfectly said. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it really is a reflection of really what's in your own heart and your own feelings, and with anything in life. I mean,
Anything.
we pick up on that no matter what, but especially
Right.
with something like this when
I
it's,
mean, even like, let's say
it's
if
more
you grew
visible.
up in a very poverty-stricken home,
Yeah,
you could present that later in your life as something you're proud to have endured and overcome, right? Or you can
absolutely.
be ashamed of it and embarrassed by it. It could apply to anything.
Absolutely. I love that. Okay, so let's talk about the latest book. And I've had a chance to go through it. It's such a good guide. So it's Exercise with Type 1 Diabetes and How to Exercise Without Scary Lows or Frustrating Highs. And I think you just did a beautiful job. It's easy to read, easy to follow, very relatable. I love the stories you put in because because I think that's another thing. I think women, men, anybody with diabetes, they really love to hear those testimonies because sometimes they don't necessarally understand a circumstance.
Yeah, we need the context.
Yeah.
Right.
So illustrating it makes it more really, relatable
Right.
and something that they can practice themselves. So
Yeah. And I hate to say well, the best time of day to exercise is first thing in the morning because it's easiest, but that's not practical for everyone, right? So I like to give examples of, there's times in my life where I couldn't exercise first thing in the morning. I had 2 young children. So here's how I exercised at 7 p.m. and made it work around type 1 and insulin.
Yeah. Again, there's that uniqueness, right? It's not a one size fits all at all, especially with our routine. And as like you say, with, when we age and our stage of hormones change, that's something I'm going through as well. I'm now postmenopausal. So, and again, that's a whole nother episode, all those hormones. So tell me can you explain aerobic versus anaerobic? Because I think, and this is something that early on, because I've always been an exerciser, my whole life I've been active, and obviously managing type 1 with that, I never knew that connection between the type of exercises I was doing and how, those frustrating highs. I think that was the biggest thing for me was that
it confuses so many people.
Yeah. So can you help explain that?
Sure. So there's really 2 things that you absolutely need to understand before you're about to go exercise. One is how much insulin you have active on board in your system, particularly rapid acting. And then 2, what type of exercise you're doing. Is it aerobic, which we often call cardio, or is it anaerobic, which we usually think of as strength training? But there are forms of cardio that can be anaerobic depending on how you do them. So aerobic basically means with oxygen. And when you are doing, let's say, a jog or a power walk or a bike ride, your body is cycling oxygen to your cells and using glucose as your primary source of fuel. When you're doing anaerobic exercise, your heart rate is high enough in these bursts where you can't maintain that intensity, right? We don't just do a bench press for an hour straight, right? We don't sprint for an hour straight. So your workout might be 30 minutes or an hour, but you're doing these moments of intensity, and then you stop, moments of intensity. And what that causes is a couple things going on. The first is lactic acid, and your body converts lactic acid to glucose. And that's totally normal. But what our body isn't doing for us, in addition to that, is the extra insulin to then use that new lactic acid as fuel. And so the reason your body needs to convert that lactic acid into glucose is because when your heart rate is going up really high, it can't cycle oxygen to your cells quickly enough to use sugar as your main source of fuel. And so anaerobic means without oxygen. So that causes blood sugars to rise. So that's the nuts and bolts of it. Then there's, of course, other situations like adrenaline during a soccer game. But people often, I see in conversations online, people think that their workout at the gym is spiking their blood sugar because of adrenaline, or even their workout at CrossFit, which is intense. But adrenaline is this true fight or flight thing. It's very hard to just trigger that in an everyday workout where you're by yourself. So mostly what's causing your blood sugar to spike is that lactic acid conversion, because your body needs that fuel.
Yeah. That's really good to know all of that. I'm going to use a personal story too, because I tend to always start my workouts, and these are things that you explain in the book too. I always start with a warm up, whether it's walking, a fast walk, stair stepping or whatever, 30 minutes, whatever. And that's a good example, because aerobic is going to, and it's intense, but it's not, again, over the years, we get used to what we're doing. So now I can better predict what's going to happen. And, the beauty of wearing a CGM, right?
Right.
And that's one of the advantages of being a diabetic, because there's so much interest now in metabolic health, right?
Yes.
Huge buzzword. Everybody's interested in wearing the CGMs, even if they don't necessarily need to monitor, but the information is so powerful.
Yeah. And we have so much more knowledge about our blood sugars in our bodies than most people will ever learn, because they don't have to pay attention.
There you go. You just said what I was thinking.
Oh, sorry.
So there's a yay for diabetics, right? For those of us that have to pay attention. So, in theory, we can better understand and to better adjust when needed. Okay.
Sorry, I'm just taking enough Residose.
I love it. And what I'll do is I'll go for my aerobic just to kind of finish that story, and then I'll start to do some weight training. But it's amazing, and it's kind of like what you just said, because it's not a big spike. Let's say I get done with my stair step and I'm about at 100 and milliliters per deciliter, which is our measurement here. And then I'll go over and I'll do maybe a 30-minute, just all over body
strength training,
weightlifting, strength training. And I will almost immediately, within 10 or 15 minutes, I'm starting to go up. I'll point up to 140, 150. Understood. I'm understanding why that's happening. Now, the good news is that it doesn't spike any higher. It tends to sit there for a little bit. And just like the point that you said in the book, no matter what, the movement is making our insulin more sensitive. So I don't dose for that 150. I don't do anything. I just wait. And within the hour, it's coming back down again.
Okay. That's good. It might, for some people, not. When I was powerlifting, there was so much lactic acid that I would end up in the 250 range if I didn't take some insulin at the start of my workout. Right. So it all kind of depends on your body and what you're doing. And the lower the reps, probably the more lactic acid, right? If the heavier the weight or sprinting.
And just like you said too, isn't it nice that we have we have a gauge telling us what's working, what's not, how to adjust. So very thankful for that. Yeah. So that's just one story, but but then I've seen other, like you said, certain exercise, which is more stressful. Sometimes when we're out of our normal comfort zone with the exertion, that's when the body really does respond. And it does all have to do with that insulin on board, because I've experienced that as well. Yeah. So when there's nothing on board, guess what?
And if you have too much insulin on board during an anaerobic workout, you can still go low, even though that workout should have spiked your blood sugar, because you just have too much insulin on board. So that's why that is the first thing you need to understand before you start exercising.
Start there. Yeah, it's really good advice. Now, I want to talk about fasted exercise too, because this is something else we both experiment with. And I think there's that conception that, there's always been this conception about those that live with diabetes, that they have to eat at a certain time. They have to take their insulin at a certain time. There's more freedom. There's a lot of freedom. There's so much that we can do. We can wait for these things. We don't have to eat at 7 a.m. Again, that's a personal thing. Right. And I love this. I've started to do more fasting in general. I work better in the morning when I'm, because the body is going through, all that process of digestion, and it's getting working, and it's better for me if I don't even have food on board until
I agree. I prefer to fast until about 11:30.
Yeah.
But to your point with exercise, so fasted exercise, regardless of if you eventually eat afterwards, many people have been taught that they'll go low if they don't eat breakfast, or that they'll go low if they don't eat before exercise. But that's only if you have insulin on board, right? That's back in the day when we had far limited options in terms of insulin and we didn't have CGMs. You didn't have a choice. You had to eat before exercise because you had regular insulin that was in your system for like 6 hours, right?
That's true.
And so some of the education hasn't caught up with that. If you go low just by skipping breakfast, you have too much background insulin in your system. Your doses are too high. And then you'll say, well, but if I decrease my dose, I'll be high the rest of the day. And I would say, well, that means you probably need, the balance is off. You need more insulin with your meals. So if you have to eat just to keep your blood sugar up, you're getting too much basal insulin. And that's what, then once you get that fine tuned, then you can practice fasted exercise or just intermittent fasting in general. And the reason it's so ideal for exercising with type 1 is because you don't have a ton of rapid acting insulin on board if you didn't just eat a meal. So it provides this freedom. I walk about 2.5 miles every morning fasted. And then depending on my work and kids schedule, I exercise again right after that, something more intense, running or weightlifting, jumping rope. And so that's like really eventually about 2 hours of exercise without having eaten anything. And it feels good to me. My stomach doesn't like to be full when I'm exercising, and my blood sugar stays either where I want it to, or if it's a little anaerobic, I might go up and I might need a little bit of a mini Novolog bolus. But you can create also, I teach in the book that if you don't have that freedom in the morning, you can create that fasted environment later in the day by just making sure that it's been at least about 3 to 4 hours since taking a bolus of rapid acting Novolog, Humalog, Fiasp, or if you're using Afrezza, then it's more like an hour to 2 hours.
Okay. Yeah. That's good information.
So then you can still have that easy to prevent lows fasted environment. And I explain in my book, when I had little kids, 7 p.m. was when I got to do my most intense workout. I walked my dogs throughout the day, but I would make sure not to eat after 4 p.m. so that by 7 o'clock, I didn't have a bunch of rapid acting insulin in my system. And I'd make sure my 4 p.m. snack was pretty low carb too. So that meant I could jump rope for a half hour, 45 minutes at 7 and not go low. And then I would eat dinner after my babies were asleep,
Right. I understand. Yeah. You got to do what works for your schedule.
Right.
Yeah. And not to mention, I've noticed this with obviously moving the body early in the morning and just how more efficient your insulin is going to be.
Yes. If I don't get that intense workout in the morning after dog walking, I need not twice as much insulin for lunch, but I need quite a bit more insulin for lunch.
Isn't it something? Yeah.
It wakes I talk about it as though it charges my battery for the day.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah. Get that going. Nice. So when you are, tell me, can you give me an example of somebody that you've worked with that you've helped with your, all the books that you've written, and especially the exercise? Maybe we can use the exercise tips and the wisdom that you have with that, and where they were and where they are now, just to give an example of somebody that, just kind of tell a story, because I think that would help listeners just kind of better understand.
So I did diabetes coaching in my 20s, but I eventually had to, once I had children, I was like, I need to focus. I'm either writing or I'm diabetes coaching, right? But I mean, I'd say really what I've done with many people is help them not be scared of exercising anymore, right? By understanding what's going on in your body. Because what happens too often is you go low, you get frustrated and pissed off, and so you give up, right? And then you might try again a few months later, and the same thing happens, and you throw your hands up in the air. And what I really want to instill in anyone is a problem-solving mindset, where you look at what were the variables happening in this moment. What can I try next time? And my book teaches you exactly what those variables are and how to simplify them so that you are safer during your workout and can actually enjoy it, right? But it applies to any, with fibromyalgia, they say most people gain 30 pounds their first year of fibromyalgia because they can't figure out how to be active and they're on the couch. I spent my first year of fibromyalgia figuring out how to be active while letting my body's pain level come down. And then I spent the years after that starting to rebuild my body's tolerance for exercise because I refused to just give up and decide this isn't possible, right? And so I went from competitive powerlifter to not being able to do anything but walk my dogs to now I can jump rope and I do karate and I can lift weights and I can run. And, it's about not just giving up. It's about just being patient and figuring out what you can do.
Yeah, I like that. And it kind of goes right back to that mindset, doesn't it? Yeah. Just realizing that we can figure it out. We're not weaker. This disease or anything is not going to, it really shouldn't stop anybody from making.
Yeah, and you need to be patient. You need, people, I could have just been feeling sorry for myself that I couldn't powerlift anymore. Right. But I didn't want to live my life on the couch. So I started with a granny's workout. It was like less than what I would give a grandmother. And I had to just accept that and tolerate that for at least a year before I could start increasing the intensity. And
right. Look at, I love that. Yeah. Yeah. And, that's a good point too. Even when we age, there's certain things that we just have to accept that maybe our body can't support us doing what we used to do when we were 20. Right. And just to kind of shift, make those adjustments and just to be grateful for what you can do. Because I think,
doesn't it drive you nuts? Have you ever had, so I'm 37. So I have some friends who are in their 60s and 70s and people in their 70s love to say like, oh, just wait till you're my age. It'll be hard. And I'm like, you have no idea what I go through in a day to exercise. Like, it's annoying.
It's all relatable. Yeah. Right. Everybody's got a story, no matter what the age, that's for sure.
Right.
So do you have any other book topic ideas that maybe you are thinking about? And you can maybe keep this to yourself because this may be, and you can share if you want, but I understand if that might be something that you want to hold on to and not.
My brain is always
protect the idea.
simmering. I need a couple of years between books usually, but I've been thinking about how to take what's in here and actually apply it for people with type 2 diabetes, which can be a little more complicated because there's, not everyone is on insulin, but the type 2s who are taking insulin have these same problems with trying to get active. Right. So that's out there. I have thought for a long time about writing a book on how to rebuild your tolerance for exercise with fibromyalgia because the books that are out there drive me nuts.
There's a good motivation. You can do better with,
they all are just like, oh, do chair yoga and go for walks and meditate. And like, that's not really, there's more than that,
Yes. And that's another good example of somebody living it that experiences it that could really teach and help people, because you're in it. This is part of your life.
Yeah. Nice. And I also simmer about a book that's really about with type 1 about your mindset, which is what we've been talking about this whole half hour, and problem solving mindset and self-pity trap. And I think it's just critical.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that term, self-pity trap. I mean, I don't like it, but I like it. That's a good phrase.
Yeah.
So what, with your busy work, taking care of yourself, how do you decompress? How do you filter? And maybe filter is not the right word, but how do you kind of mitigate stress?
I mean, my body knows that going for a jog or going for a dog walk is going to make me feel 10 times less stressed and also give me energy. So once your brain like clicks with like, oh, I'm tired, I need to go work out, it's so freeing because it's no longer, I'm tired, I don't think I can go exercise. And there are certainly days where I know my body is truly tired and I need an afternoon of rest, right? But most of the time that jog recharges me. And I walk with my husband twice a day, and I crave it, right? And my body craves it. And if I were to miss that, it feels like something is really wrong.
Yeah. And, that reminds me too, I think a lot of people might look at how, I don't think we're strict with our lifestyle. I think we've come to a point where we know what feels good. And I crave what feeling good.
Yeah.
Right. So that's
it's not strictness. It's not obsessed with exercise. It's just knowing like, oh, this is what helps me thrive. And I made gluten-free brownies last night. I eat chocolate or dessert every day. But I try to make sure I only eat it once a day. Right. So I know that I want it the most after dinner. So I eat really clean during the day, and I save, and I don't eat perfectly. I do eat pizza sometimes and blah, 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 like I eat far from perfectly.
Definitely ways to factor it in.
Creating a gentle balance that you can sustain.
Yeah, I like that gentle balance. Very good. So, and it sounds like you're already inspired. So what inspires you and gives you hope as you continue managing diabetes and fibromyalgia, and now the POTS? I'm sorry to hear about that. That's added to your list, and the celiac. So what motivates you? What keeps you going?
I think some of that is personality, right? There's some of that we can't control, just our nature. And I definitely have my father's nature, but I also learned from my father this phrase that he used to always say, and he passed a few years ago, and I tattooed it on my wrist. He'd say, AIO, Jen, AIO, adapt, improvise, and overcome. And he was the kind of guy that when we would be waking up and pouring our bowl of cereal in 6th grade, at 6 a.m., he would just be getting home from having cycled 70 miles. And then he would, get ready for work and go run his business for 10 hours. Wow. And, no excuses, right? He still found time to get that bike ride in every day. Yeah. So that AIO mentality is really, again, what we've been talking about of life is not supposed to be easy, and you can wallow and mope about it, or you can adapt and figure out what you need to do, improvise, and then move on. Right.
I love that. Yeah. And that's, and you can see, I can see, and hear in your voice just how motivating that was, to have his example and inspiration. He obviously inspired you, and it continues to live in you. So that's,
and, I've had doctors tell me, I've had plenty of people to try to tell me you're done, right? You need to go sit down and take it easy. But if you just find a little bit of stubbornness, which I have plenty, you can really figure out on your own, and don't wait for somebody to lay out some easy path for you.
There you go. Because we know ourselves best, don't we? Right. Listen to our own inner voice, our own intuition. Well, this has been amazing. I am so thankful to have met and had a chance to share you with our listeners. And can you share how our listeners can connect with you, your website, and how they can get a hold of that new book?
All of my books are on Amazon, and actually Exercise with Type 1 Diabetes is also available in Spanish as of this week. Nice. Thanks to my amazing translating friends, Mariana Gomez and Kareem. Amazon, and then gingervieira.com. I have put every article I've ever written broken into topics on my website on type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So there's a ton on there about inhaled insulin and everything.
Nice. Easy to find and locate. Nice. Well, I encourage everybody to, if you're not already connected with Ginger, to do so. It's going to definitely fill you and help to inspire you with life with type 1. And I would love to have you back again. So we already talked about some other things that we could dive into. I'm real excited to be able to bring all these wonderful help and support for the listeners here. So again, thank you, Ginger. And all that she mentioned will be in the show notes as well. So I will link all that to make it easy for everybody to find you. And enjoy your day. Again, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me, Melissa.
You are welcome. So I encourage everybody to have a hope-filled life and journey today, and always with type 1 diabetes. You can do this. See you soon. Thank you for listening to the Type 1 and Midlife podcast. Head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. Thank you. And be sure to check us out at abundanthealthwithmelissa.com for our free resources. See you next week.